The Fatal Silence Beneath the Waves, June 23, 1944. Somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, a Japanese submarine sliced through black water, carrying gold, tin, and secrets meant for Germany. Its commander thought the ocean was silent, but the silence was listening. Within 3 hours, 94 men would vanish, their deaths heard, recorded, and analyzed by American aircraft miles above. That night, Japan's submariners learned a truth more terrifying than depth charges. The ocean no longer belonged to them. When the hunter became the hunted, for decades, Japan ruled the Pacific depths with steel and stealth. But in 1944, something invisible began stalking their submarines. It didn't roar or flash, it listened. Sonobuoys, floating microphones dropped from the sky, could now hear submarines miles below the surface. To Japanese crews, it felt like witchcraft. But it wasn't magic. It was the beginning of technological warfare, and the night the ocean switched sides. A death of I-52 and the death of an illusion. The Japanese submarine I-52 carried 2 tons of gold, bound for Germany. Its crew thought they were unseen, but 10,000 feet above, American planes were listening through the waves, with technology Japan didn't even know existed. When the first listening bombs hit the water, the ocean itself betrayed I-52. The last sounds of the dying submarine were recorded on wire spools, proof that the sea had turned against its masters. The moment Japan lost the ocean, Japan entered World War II with the world's largest submarines, vessels that could launch aircraft and cross the globe. But they were fighting an enemy that didn't just build ships, it built systems. Radar that could see through night, sonobuoys that could hear through miles of water, torpedoes that could hunt by sound. One by one, Japan's undersea giants vanished. Not because of bravery lost, but because technology had changed. We thought the ocean was ours? That's what Japanese submariners would say after the war. They thought the sea was their sanctuary, until one mission changed everything. A mission carrying gold, bound for Europe, a signal caught mid-ocean, and a horrifying realization. The Americans could hear them, track them, kill them, all without ever seeing them. It wasn't a battle. It was a revelation. The sound of defeat. You can hear the moment Japan lost the ocean. It's on an old recording. The metallic scream of a submarine hull collapsing 17,000 feet below. The Americans who listened called it the sound of victory. But for Japan, it was the sound of something deeper, the death rattle of an empire outpaced by technology. When the ocean turned against them, for centuries the sea had protected Japan, a natural fortress. But by 1944, it had become a trap. American aircraft dropped strange floating devices that listened to the depths. Every sound a submarine made, a propeller, a valve, a whisper, could now betray it. The ocean was no longer a shield. It had become an American weapon. The gold submarine that never arrived. A Japanese submarine loaded with gold, radar parts, and war plans slipped beneath the Atlantic, confident it was unseen. But above the waves, a new kind of hunter waited. One that didn't chase, didn't search. It listened. When the first sonar signals echoed back, the fate of I-52 was sealed, and with it, Japan's illusion of underwater dominance. The war Japan couldn't hear coming. They had massive submarines, long-range torpedoes, brilliant engineers, But they couldn't fight what they couldn't hear. American technology turned sound into a weapon. The first time a Japanese submarine was tracked underwater, their Navy realized something unthinkable. The enemy could hear them breathe. From pride to paranoia, Japan's submariners began the war with pride, elite crews aboard engineering marvels. But as months passed, reports grew stranger. They always find us. The torpedoes follow us. Even the ocean betrays us. They weren't imagining things. The Americans had turned the sea itself into a listening weapon, and Japan's confidence into quiet terror. June 23, 1944, mid-Atlantic Ocean, approximately 870 nautical miles west of the Cape Verde Islands. Commander Uno Kameo stood in the cramped control room of I-52, a massive Japanese cargo submarine carrying 2 tons of gold, 120 tons of tin, and precious war materials bound for German-occupied France. Through his periscope, he watched the German U-530 slip away into the darkness after transferring radar equipment and 2 technicians. The rendezvous had gone smoothly. Soon, his submarine would surface for the night run toward Europe, moving at 15 knots under starless skies. Everything seemed perfect. Within 3 hours, Commander Kameo and his 94 crewmen would be dead, victims of a technology they didn't know existed. The sounds of their submarine breaking apart would be recorded on wire spools by American aircraft circling overhead, listening through devices floating on the ocean's surface. These sonobuoys, dropped from an Avenger torpedo bomber, would transmit the death throes of I-52 to operators miles above, marking not just the destruction of one submarine, but the psychological demolition of Japanese naval confidence. The ocean, once Japan's highway to empire, had become an American surveillance grid where nothing could hide. The mathematics of this technological asymmetry were already being written across the Pacific in statistics that would shatter every assumption Japanese submariners held about their capabilities, their mission, and their chances of survival. Between 1941 and 1945, American submarines would sink 1,314 Japanese ships, totaling 5.3 million tons, accounting for 56% of all Japanese merchant losses. Japanese submarines, despite their technical sophistication and impressive size, would sink merely 184 Allied ships totaling 1 million tons. The disparity wasn't just numerical. It represented a fundamental difference in how 2 nations approached undersea warfare, industrial production, and technological innovation. While Japan built the world's largest submarines, vessels capable of carrying aircraft and circumnavigating the globe, America built sonar systems that could hear them coming from miles away. While Japanese engineers created magnificent vessels, American factories produced sonobuoys, FM sonar, acoustic torpedoes, and radar systems faster than Japan could conceptualize countermeasures. The transformation would begin not with a single dramatic moment, but through thousands of encounters where Japanese submariners gradually realized they were being hunted by forces they couldn't see, tracked by technologies they didn't understand, and systematically eliminated by an industrial machine of incomprehensible scale. Lieutenant Commander Nobuo Nambu, commanding officer of I-401, one of Japan's massive submarine aircraft carriers, would later tell America. Interrogators after his surrender in August 1945 that the moment he understood Japan had lost the war came not from any battle, but from overhearing American radio traffic during a patrol. The casual efficiency, the abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, The sheer volume of coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean all pointed to capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. But for thousands of Japanese submariners, the realization came through direct, terrifying encounters with American anti-submarine warfare technology. Encounters that left survivors stunned and demoralized. The story of how Japanese submarine crews came to understand American technological superiority is not one of dramatic battles or heroic last stands. It's a story of cumulative revelation, of gradual understanding, of technological shock so profound that it transformed confident warriors into men who knew their cause was hopeless long before their nation officially surrendered. The Japanese submarine force that entered World War II in December 1941 was one of the world's finest. Japan possessed approximately 70 ocean-going submarines, many of revolutionary design. The I-400 class submarines, the largest in the world until nuclear-powered vessels appeared in the 1960s, measured 400 feet long and displaced 5,900 tons submerged. They could carry 3 Aichi M6A1 Seiran floatplane bombers in a watertight hangar, launch them via catapult, and theoretically strike targets as far away as New York City or the Panama Canal. Each I-400 class submarine carried enough fuel to circumnavigate the world 1.5 times without refueling, traveling 37,500 nautical miles at 14 knots. The engineering was magnificent. These submarines featured special trim systems for submerged loitering, demagnetization cables to protect against magnetic mines, air search radar, and anechoic coatings designed to absorb sonar pulses. Smaller Japanese submarines were equally impressive. The Type C cargo submarines like I-52 could travel 21,000 nautical miles, carrying vital strategic materials between Japan and its allies. Fast attack submarines prowled the Pacific with long-range torpedoes and impressive underwater capabilities. Japanese submariners trained extensively, practiced stealth operations, and understood their boats intimately. Many had years of experience. Commander Tatsunosuke Arizumi, who would lead submarine operations late in the war, was considered one of Japan's finest underwater tacticians. His crews were disciplined, skilled, and confident. They had reason for confidence. In the early months of the war, Japanese submarines participated successfully in the Pearl Harbor operation, reconnoitered American positions, supported fleet operations, and hunted Allied warships. The doctrine emphasized fleet support, protecting Japanese naval assets, conducting reconnaissance, and attacking high-value military targets. Unlike American submarines that would focus on commerce raiding, Japanese submarines were reserved primarily for tactical operations against enemy warships. This strategic decision would prove catastrophic. While Japanese submarines hunted American aircraft carriers, American submarines were systematically destroying the merchant fleet that kept Japan's war economy alive. More importantly, this tactical focus meant Japanese submariners encountered American anti-submarine warfare systems, primarily in the most dangerous contexts, when American naval forces were most alert and most heavily protected. The first encounters with sonobuoys occurred in 1944, after American industry had perfected the technology. Sonobuoys were deceptively simple devices, small, battery-powered sonar units that could be dropped from aircraft and would float on the ocean surface, listening for submarine sounds and transmitting them via radio to the aircraft above. Developed by the British in 1944 under the code name High T, they were quickly adopted and improved by American forces. The impact was revolutionary. Previously, an aircraft hunting a submarine had to maintain visual contact or rely on radar, which only worked when the submarine was surfaced. Once a submarine dived, it was effectively invisible to aircraft. Sonobuoys changed everything. An aircraft could drop a pattern of 5 sonobuoys, color-coded, purple, orange, blue, red, and yellow, creating an underwater listening grid. The aircraft would monitor each buoy in turn, listening for sounds emitted by submarine propellers, machinery, or movement. The technology was so effective that it became standard equipment on anti-submarine aircraft throughout 1944 and 1945. For Commander Uno Kameo and the crew of I-52, the first indications something was wrong came at 11:40 p.m. on June 23, 1944. Lieutenant Commander Jesse D. Taylor's Avenger torpedo bomber, launched from the escort carrier USS Bogue, detected I-52 on radar 1. She ran on the surface. Taylor dropped flares that illuminated the massive submarine, then attacked with depth bombs as I-52 crash-dived. The first attack nearly missed, explosions bracketing the submarine as she descended. What happened next revolutionized anti-submarine warfare. Taylor dropped a purple sonobuoy into the water. Within moments, his radio operator heard the distinctive sound of submarine propellers transmitted from the floating device. Taylor could now track I-52 underwater, follow her evasive maneuvers, predict her movements, and position his aircraft for the killing blow. He dropped a Mark 24 mine, codename Fido, an acoustic homing torpedo that locked onto I-52's propeller noise and followed it relentlessly until it struck. The sonobuoys recorded everything: the explosion, the sounds of the hull breaking apart. Commander Taylor's crew heard what they described as crackling and crunching noises like a tin can being crushed. I-52 sank to the ocean floor, 17,000 feet below, taking Commander Kameo, 94 crewmen, 14 passengers, and 2 German technicians to their deaths. The sonobuoy recordings survived in the National Archives. Thin wire spools marked Gordon Wire Number 1 and Gordon Wire Number 2, preserving the last moments of a submarine whose crew never knew what technology had killed them. The sinking of I-52 demonstrated capabilities that terrified Japanese submariners when details filtered through intelligence networks. American aircraft could track submarines underwater. The implications were staggering. Every time a Japanese submarine dived to escape aircraft, it wasn't escaping at all. It was simply hiding from visual observation while remaining perfectly visible to acoustic sensors. American hunter-killer groups, centered around escort carriers like USS Bogue, combined radar, sonobuoys, and acoustic torpedoes into integrated systems that transformed submarine hunting from chance encounter into systematic elimination. USS Bogue's task force alone sank 13 German and Japanese submarines between February 1943 and July 1945, using these methods repeatedly. Japanese submariners began reporting strange experiences. Aircraft would appear over diving positions with impossible accuracy. Depth charges would fall in precise patterns despite the submarine being hundreds of feet deep. Torpedoes would follow evasive maneuvers as if guided by invisible hands. They were being hunted by technologies their own Navy hadn't deployed, couldn't counter, and barely understood. The psychological impact deepened with Operation Barney in June 1945, when 9 American submarines, equipped with FM sonar, penetrated the Sea of Japan through heavily mined straits, that Japanese planners had considered impregnable. The Sea of Japan was supposed to be Japan's safe haven, protected by 4 lines of underwater mines in Tsushima Strait. Japanese merchant shipping moved freely there, believing submarines couldn't navigate the minefields. FM sonar, developed specifically to detect underwater obstacles, emitted a distinctive chime whenever mines were detected, a sound American submariners dubbed Hell's Bells. The technology allowed submarines to map entire minefield patterns, identify safe passages, and navigate through barriers Japanese engineers thought would stop any underwater approach. On June 4, 1945, the first 3 submarines, Sea Dog, Creval, and Spadefish, entered Tsushima Strait submerged, their FM sonar painting pictures of the minefield on electronic screens. The Hell's Bells chimed constantly as they wove between mines, spaced sometimes only 50 yards apart. After 20 hours underwater, all 3 submarines emerged safely into the Sea of Japan. 2 more groups followed, and within days, 9 American submarines were operating freely in waters Japan had considered absolutely secure. The hunting was spectacular. Between June 9th and June 24th, 1945, the 9 submarines sank 28 Japanese ships, totaling 54,786 tons, including a submarine and a destroyer. They operated with impunity, surfacing at night to charge batteries, submerging during the day to attack shipping that believed itself safe from undersea threat. Japanese Naval Command was stunned. Intelligence reports began flowing in, describing submarine attacks inside the Sea of Japan. Survivors reported American submarines operating freely, attacking at will, escaping without difficulty. The psychological blow was immense. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters, if they possessed technology that could navigate through minefields but had taken years to lay, then nowhere was safe. The ocean itself had become enemy territory. Japanese submarine commanders operating in these waters understood the implications immediately. They were being hunted by forces possessing technological capabilities Japan couldn't match. Every patrol became an exercise in survival rather than combat effectiveness. The technological gap extended far beyond sonar. American submarines possessed radar sets that could detect surface contacts at ranges exceeding 20 miles in good conditions. Japanese submarines didn't receive radar until June 1944, and even then, only in limited quantities with performance inferior to American systems. This meant American submarines could detect Japanese vessels long before they were detected in return, could track targets from beyond visual range, and could position themselves for attacks with information advantages Japanese commanders couldn't counter. American submarines also benefited from ultra-intelligence, the code-breaking operation that decrypted Japanese naval communications. American forces knew Japanese submarine schedules, patrol areas, supply routes, and operational plans often before Japanese submarines received their orders. Combined with radar and sonar superiority, this meant Japanese submarines were operating in an ocean where the enemy knew where they were going, and what technology could track them getting there. Lieutenant Commander Nobuo Nambu, commanding I-401, later described the feeling to American interrogators as being constantly watched, constantly tracked, never safe, even when submerged in empty ocean. The paranoia wasn't unjustified. It was an accurate assessment of reality. The industrial disparity manifested in ways that shocked Japanese submariners who survived to see American facilities after surrender. While Japan struggled to maintain 70 operational submarines throughout the war, America built 314 submarines between 1941 and 1945, replacing losses faster than combat could inflict them. American shipyards operated around the clock. The submarines themselves represented industrial capabilities beyond Japanese comprehension. American Gato and Balao-class submarines, while smaller than Japanese giants, were produced with standardized components manufactured across dozens of factories. Engines, batteries, torpedoes, periscopes, sonar systems, all flowed from separate facilities and arrived at assembly yards in perfectly coordinated streams. A single Gato-class submarine required approximately 140,000 parts manufactured by contractors in 32 states. The supply chain never faltered. When submarines needed repairs, spare parts were available immediately. When submarines were lost, replacements arrived within months. Japanese submarines damaged in combat often waited weeks or months for repairs due to parts shortages, maintenance facility overload, and industrial bottlenecks that American forces never experienced. The torpedo situation exemplified the technological and industrial gap. American submarines began the war with the defective Mark 14 torpedo, plagued by depth control problems, magnetic exploder failures, and contact detonator issues. For nearly 2 years, American submariners fought with weapons that frequently failed to explode or ran at incorrect depths, passing uselessly beneath targets. This might have been Japan's opportunity to exploit American weakness. Instead, American submariners themselves identified the problems, conducted their own testing, and implemented fixes despite resistance from the Bureau of Ordnance. By September 1943, the Mark 14's defects were corrected. Simultaneously, the electric Mark 18 torpedo entered service, leaving no wake, and thus giving targets no warning of incoming attack. The Mark 24 mine, actually an acoustic homing torpedo, codenamed Fido, could be dropped from aircraft and would autonomously track submarine propeller sounds until impact. Japanese forces never developed equivalent weapons. Japanese torpedoes were generally reliable, but offered no technological advantages. More critically, Japanese industry couldn't produce them in quantities approaching American output. American submarines carried 24 torpedoes on patrol. They fired them freely, knowing resupply was guaranteed. Japanese submarines carried fewer torpedoes and were constrained to fire them conservatively due to limited availability. The cumulative effect of these technological and industrial advantages created a mathematical inevitability that Japanese submariners gradually understood. Every patrol, every encounter, every narrow escape from American anti-submarine forces reinforced the same lesson. The ocean belonged to America now. American submarines sank an average of 1 Japanese ship per day throughout 1944, the peak year of their campaign. In that single year, 492 Japanese merchant vessels totaling 2,387,780 tons were destroyed by submarine attack. Japanese submarine construction couldn't replace the vessels being lost. Japanese merchant marine capacity, which stood at approximately 6 million tons in 1941, had fallen to 2 million tons by August 1945, with only 320,000 tons in condition to carry cargo. The destruction of Japanese shipping wasn't just a military problem. It represented the systematic strangulation of Japan's war economy. Rice from Southeast Asia couldn't reach Japanese cities. Oil from the Dutch East Indies couldn't reach Japanese refineries. Rubber, tin, tungsten, all the materials Japan needed to continue fighting were trapped in overseas territories while American submarines patrolled the sea lanes. By 1945, American submarines were experiencing difficulty finding targets large enough to justify torpedo expenditure. The Japanese merchant marine had been virtually eliminated. What few ships remained hugged coastlines, used narrow channels where submarine operations were dangerous, or simply stayed in port, unwilling to risk the journey. Japanese cabinet ministers would later tell the Diet that the greatest cause of defeat was the loss of shipping, acknowledging that American submarines accomplished more toward victory than any other single weapon system. For Japanese submariners who survived the war and witnessed American operations firsthand after surrender, the technological revelations were devastating. Captain Arizumi, developer of the I-400 submarine program and one of Japan's most experienced submarine officers, committed suicide aboard I-401 rather than face surrender. He understood what many Japanese naval officers were beginning to accept. Japan had challenged an industrial power whose technological capabilities exceeded anything Japanese planners had anticipated. When I-400 and I-401, the massive submarine aircraft carriers, surrendered in August 1945, American sailors who boarded them were astounded by their size. These submarines were longer than American destroyers, displaced more tonnage than anything in the American submarine fleet, and possessed capabilities that seemed futuristic. Yet, they had accomplished nothing operationally. Neither submarine fired a shot in anger. The planned attack on Ulithi Atoll was canceled when hostilities ended. The planned strike on the Panama Canal never occurred. These magnificent vessels, representing thousands of hours of engineering work and scarce industrial resources, contributed nothing to Japan's war effort precisely because American technological superiority made their missions impossible. They couldn't reach their targets undetected. They couldn't operate safely in American-controlled waters. They couldn't survive the hunter-killer groups, the sonobuoys, the radar, the acoustic torpedoes. The systematic anti-submarine warfare systems that American forces had perfected. American examination of captured Japanese submarines revealed both impressive engineering and critical weaknesses. The hulls were not as strong as German or American designs, limiting safe diving depth. The submarines were easy to detect on sonar, their large size and construction creating acoustic signatures that American sonar operators could identify from miles away. They lacked radar until very late in the war. They had no equivalent to American FM sonar for mine detection. Their anti-aircraft defenses were inadequate against American aircraft that hunted them with increasing effectiveness. Most critically, Japanese submarines lacked the integrated fire control systems that made American submarines so deadly. American submarines used target data computer systems that automatically calculated firing solutions, accounting for target course, speed, range, and torpedo characteristics. Japanese submarines relied on manual calculations that took longer, were more error-prone, and put submarines at greater risk during attack approaches. The technological gap wasn't subtle. It was profound and pervasive, affecting every aspect of submarine operations. The human cost of this technological inferiority was staggering. Japan lost 130 submarines during the war, representing approximately twice the percentage loss rate of American submarines. Of the 70 submarines Japan possessed in December 1941, plus those built during the war, most were destroyed by American anti-submarine forces, using the very technologies Japanese submariners had come to fear: sonar, radar, aerial attack, depth charges, and systematic hunter-killer operations. Approximately 10,000 Japanese submariners died during the war, a casualty rate exceeding 70%. Submarine service, initially considered prestigious and honorable, became recognized as a death sentence by war's end. Young men assigned to submarine duty understood they likely wouldn't survive. Families mourned sons departing for submarine training, knowing the statistical odds. The Japanese submarine force, which had entered the war with confidence and pride, ended the war as a broken arm of a defeated navy, its survivors demoralized and its capabilities nullified by technological inferiority. The psychological transformation of Japanese submariners mirrored the experience of German POWs in America, but followed a different path, where German prisoners witnessed American abundance and prosperity directly. Japanese submariners experienced American technological superiority through lethal encounters at sea. Both groups reached the same conclusion through different evidence. Japan and Germany had challenged nations whose industrial and technological capabilities exceeded anything Axis powers could match. For Japanese submariners who surrendered in August 1945, the evidence of American superiority was overwhelming and undeniable. They were brought aboard American submarines and shown technology they had never seen. They toured American naval facilities and witnessed production capabilities that explained why American forces never seemed to run short of anything. They saw the sonobuoys that had hunted their comrades. They examined the FM sonar that had allowed American submarines to penetrate minefields. They studied the radar systems that gave American submarines eyes beyond visual range. They handled the acoustic torpedoes that had destroyed so many Japanese submarines. Lieutenant Commander Nambu, taken aboard USS Segundo after surrendering I-401, was given a tour of the American submarine by Lieutenant Commander Stephen L. Johnson. Nambu examined Segundo's radar, her sonar systems, her fire control computer, her torpedo loading mechanisms. Everything was more advanced then. Equivalent Japanese systems. More importantly, everything worked reliably. Equipment didn't break down. Systems functioned as designed. American submariners operated their boat with casual confidence that came from knowing their technology was superior and their support was guaranteed. Johnson's crew had survived 9 war patrols, sunk Japanese vessels, evaded enemy anti-submarine forces, and expected to survive the war. Japanese submariners had no equivalent confidence. They operated knowing American technology could find them, track them, kill them. The psychological burden was immense. Nambu later told interrogators that the moment he understood Japan had lost wasn't when he heard of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but months earlier, when he monitored American radio traffic and heard the casual efficiency with which American forces coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean. Equivalent Japanese systems. More importantly, everything worked reliably. Equipment didn't break down. Systems functioned as designed. American submariners operated their boat with casual confidence that came from knowing their technology was superior and their support was guaranteed. Johnson's crew had survived 9 war patrols, sunk Japanese vessels, evaded enemy anti-submarine forces, and expected to survive the war. Japanese submariners had no equivalent confidence. They operated knowing American technology could find them, track them, kill them. The psychological burden was immense. Nambu later told interrogators that the moment he understood Japan had lost wasn't when he heard of Hiroshima or Nagasaki, but months earlier when he monitored American radio traffic and heard the casual efficiency with which American forces coordinated operations across thousands of miles of ocean. The sheer scale of American operations The abundance of resources mentioned in routine communications, the technological sophistication implied in everyday procedures, all pointed to capabilities Japan simply couldn't match. The evidence continued to accumulate during the months after surrender. Japanese submariners were brought to American bases in Japan, to Kure, where captured submarines were studied, to Tokyo Bay, where surrender ceremonies occurred with American submarines prominently displayed. Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood, commander of Submarine Force Pacific, made a point of having his flag hoisted aboard I-400 and I-401 during the surrender ceremony on September 2, 1945, aboard USS Missouri. The symbolism was clear. American submarines had defeated Japanese submarines through technological and industrial superiority. When I-400 and I-401 were taken to Hawaii for detailed examination by American naval engineers, Japanese crew members accompanied them as technical advisors. They watched American engineers disassemble their boats methodically, photographing every component, measuring every dimension, documenting every system. The Americans were thorough, professional, and impressed by some aspects of Japanese engineering, but they were not intimidated. American engineers had seen these submarines and understood them. They had defeated them not through superior seamanship, but through superior technology deployed with overwhelming industrial capacity. The final revelation came when I-400, I-401, and other captured Japanese submarines were taken to sea off Hawaii and deliberately sunk as target ships in mid-1946. The decision was driven partly by Soviet demands to examine the submarines. American forces refused to let Soviet engineers study Japanese submarine technology, so they destroyed it. But the symbolism resonated with Japanese submariners who learned of the decision. The finest submarines, vessels that represented Japan's technological apex, vessels that could carry aircraft across the Pacific and strike American cities, were destroyed casually by forces that no longer needed them for study. American submarine technology had advanced beyond anything Japanese boats could teach. The vessels that had once represented Japanese naval power were reduced to target practice, their destruction barely noted in American records. For Japanese submariners, the message was clear. Japan had built impressive submarines, but America had built technology that made them obsolete. The ocean had never truly been Japan's. It had simply taken time for American technological and industrial superiority to manifest fully. The lessons learned by Japanese submariners spread through post-war Japan as survivors returned home and shared their experiences. Many wrote memoirs describing their shock at American technological capabilities. Others gave lectures to Japanese self-defense force personnel about the importance of technological parity in modern warfare. The submarine veterans associations that formed in the 1950s and 1960s focused heavily on understanding what had gone wrong, why Japan's submarine force had achieved so little despite impressive engineering. The conclusions were unanimous: technological inferiority, industrial weakness, and strategic misuse had doomed Japanese submarines from the start. No amount of courage, skill, or determination could overcome the fundamental asymmetry in capabilities. American submarines operated with technological advantages at every level: detection, fire control, communication, navigation, and logistics. Japanese submarines, regardless of how well designed or skillfully operated, were fighting from positions of permanent disadvantage. The submariners who learned this lesson carried it into Japan's post-war reconstruction, influencing industrial policy, technological development, and military planning for decades. The economic miracle that transformed Japan in the 1950s and 1960s was partly informed by lessons learned during the war. Japanese industry focused on technological excellence, quality control, and competitive advantage rather than size or grandeur. The I-400 submarines had been impressive, but ineffective. Post-war Japan built smaller, more reliable, more technologically advanced products. The emphasis shifted from creating impressive individual achievements to building integrated systems that worked reliably. Sony, Toyota, Honda, and other Japanese companies that became global leaders learned from military failures during the war. They understood that technological superiority required not just good ideas, but complete systems, reliable production, quality assurance, and continuous improvement. Former Japanese naval officers, including submarine veterans, took positions in these companies and influenced their development. The lessons of American technological superiority during the war shaped post-war Japanese industrial philosophy. The transformation was complete when Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force submarines began incorporating American technology in the 1960s and 1970s. Japanese submariners trained with American instructors, learned American tactics, used American sonar systems, and operated boats designed with American assistance. The former enemies became allies, united by recognition that technological excellence and industrial capacity determined outcomes in modern warfare. For Japanese submariners who had experienced the war, this transformation vindicated their post-war assessment. Japan needed to match American technological capabilities, not just admire them from a position of inferiority. By the 1980s, Japan's submarines were among the world's finest. Incorporating lessons learned through painful defeat. The circle was complete. The submariners who had been hunted by American sonar now built submarines using equivalent technology, having learned through defeat what victory had taught their former enemies. The recordings of I-52's destruction, preserved on wire spools in American archives, remain as testimony to technological revolution in warfare. Modern analysis of those recordings by Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Laboratory confirmed that acoustic homing torpedoes guided by sounds transmitted through sonobuoys destroyed I-52 conclusively. The technology that killed Commander Kameo and his crew in June 1944 represented capabilities Japan never matched throughout the war. Those same capabilities, refined and improved, became standard in modern navies worldwide. Sonar, radar, acoustic torpedoes, all evolved from technologies that shocked Japanese submariners in 1944 and 1945. The story of Japanese submarine crews realizing the ocean was no longer theirs is ultimately a story about technological change in warfare. Superior technology deployed with industrial capacity trumped courage, skill, and determination. Japanese submariners were not cowards. They were not incompetent. They were operating with inadequate technology against forces possessing decisive advantages. The psychological journey from confidence to recognition of defeat paralleled the experience of German POWs in America, though the context differed. Both groups encountered American capabilities they couldn't explain, couldn't counter, and eventually couldn't deny. Both groups returned to their homelands carrying lessons about technological and industrial competition that shaped post-war development. Both groups influenced Reconstruction by emphasizing the importance of matching American capabilities rather than simply admiring or resenting them. The ocean that Japanese submariners once prowled with confidence became an American domain through technology and industry. Sonobuoys floating on the surface transmitted sounds from below. Radar swept the horizon beyond visual range. Acoustic torpedoes hunted submarines autonomously. Hunter-killer groups coordinated aircraft and surface vessels into integrated systems that eliminated submarines systematically. The transformation was complete by mid-1945, leaving Japanese submarines with nowhere to hide, no safe harbor, no hope of survival. When the 9 American submarines of Operation Barney emerged from the Sea of Japan through La Perouse Strait in late June 1945, having sunk 28 Japanese ships in supposedly impregnable waters, the psychological defeat of Japanese naval forces was complete. If American submarines could penetrate the most heavily defended waters using technology to navigate through minefields, then Japanese naval supremacy was finished. The ocean belonged to those who controlled the technology. Japanese submariners understood this lesson viscerally. They had been hunted, tracked, and killed by technologies they couldn't see and couldn't counter. Those who survived carried the knowledge that Japan's defeat was inevitable once American industrial and technological superiority manifested fully. The ocean was never truly Japan's. It had only taken time for reality to assert itself. American sonobuoys, radar systems, acoustic torpedoes, and industrial capacity had transformed submarine warfare. Japanese submariners, regardless of their skill or courage, were operating in an environment where the enemy possessed decisive technological advantages. It belonged to the nation that learned to listen to the ocean itself. With sonobuoys drifting on the waves, radar sweeping unseen horizons, and factories producing technology faster than their enemies could comprehend, the United States had transformed the sea into an instrument of intelligence and annihilation. For Japan's submariners, it was a revelation, written not in words, but in sound. The crackle of their dying vessels echoing through American headphones miles above. In those final moments beneath the Atlantic, courage met circuitry, and the ocean that once carried Japan's empire became a vast, silent witness to its collapse. From that day forward, the deep no longer served the brave. It served those who mastered its hidden frequencies.